So usually, if I'm taking a look at something from the Bible, I try to get all creative and wonderful about it. But the part I want to look at today needs more dissecting, I would say. Don't worry, it's not going to be cold and clinical. I'm not taking things out of context. The passage we're going to look at is from Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 to 20, 6 verses. And most people think that this is like a song or a poem or a statement that was already bobbing about in the first churches. Well, it was formed as a poem and was put into Paul's letter. So it's crammed full of images and language from the Jewish scriptures themselves. So I'm going to read the whole thing and then I'll go through it all. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's the first in line over all creation. For in Jesus, everything was created, everything in heaven, on earth, everything that can be seen and that is unseen, whether they are thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through Jesus and for Jesus. He is first in everything, and in him everything is still being held together. And Jesus is the head of his people, the church. Jesus is the beginning and the first in line of everyone who will share in his resurrection, so that in everything Jesus might have the sovereignty. For God was delighted to have all of his fullness embody Jesus. And through Jesus, God reconciled everything back to himself, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through Jesus' blood shed on the cross. Wow! It's a pretty loaded passage, isn't it? It's like one of those loaded potato skins where you take all the potato out and you put extra goodies in like bacon, onion, mushrooms, garlic, and then it's all put back inside again. So here we go. So the first half, verses 15, 16, 17, they show us how Jesus' disciples and the first new Christians everywhere, they concluded that Jesus is the exact image of God. It's funny because the Bible kind of tells us that God is unseeable. He's spirit, and the only ways that we can see him are the things that he does and the things that he's made for us. So for instance, he's made the universe, and the universe is described in the Bible as being like this foghorn screaming out, "Somebody made me!" And then there's the times that God rescues and provides and answers prayer and protects, and these show us, for instance, that God is provider, loving father, protector. But in this poem, we hear that when we see Jesus, we are literally looking at God himself, not an avatar or a representation. God in human flesh and blood. That's really, really important for Christians today, like me, to get our heads around. Jesus is not simply a good moral teacher or a revolutionary or a historical figure or a spiritual healer. He is God himself. There's a strange choice of words in the first part where the writer says that Jesus is the firstborn over all creation. It's an ancient reference to Jesus being first in line to the throne. So I rewrote firstborn over all creation into first in line over all creation. It's to do with Jesus' royal status, that this kingly position is not just in heaven, it's over everything, everywhere that exists. It's a massive statement to make. The poem clarifies this and says that Jesus is king over things in heaven and on earth. Things we can see, things we will never be able to see. The poem goes on to claim that Jesus is actually king over everything, every political and spiritual power that has ever existed and ever will exist. In fact, the whole of creation, the natural world, the universe at large, every country, every government, every family, and every individual. We're all here, made through him and for him. All of reality. We owe our existence to Jesus. This is what we'd expect someone to say about God, but this poem is on purpose putting all of this language onto Jesus. That's the first half of the song. The second half of the song, verses 18, 19, 20, we find that not only is Jesus the one who's brought about the whole of existence and reality, and he's holding it all together, but he is also revolutionizing it and making it all new. Let's just pause there for a moment. That's mind-blowing. Everything that's ever has been or will be created, the whole fabric of space-time, it's all been created by and for Jesus, and it all bows to his will, and he is holding it together and renewing it all. So there's Jesus, he's in a boat and they've got no fish, and he tells Peter to throw his net over the side and they'll get the biggest catch of fish they ever will have done, and they do. He sees a crowd of hungry people and he multiplies one lunchbox into food enough for thousands of people. Here's Jesus meeting people who are blind or deaf or with limbs or spines that aren't working properly, and he reverses that. And there's 3 occasions where he reverses death itself. Once for a little girl, once for the son of a widow, and once for a man called Lazarus. It's no wonder that in John's Gospel, Jesus transforms water into wine and stills a storm. And when he's been arrested at the end of his life, he simply affirms his name, and the guys that have come to arrest him, they fall over with the power of his words. This king of the universe, king over every power and authority and every world leader and family group and animal and every star and every blade of grass. This is the Jesus that Christians worship. So this second part of the poem, we find that the one who's created all things and holding it all together is revolutionizing it all. He's making it all new. He's the head of his people, the church. It's this constant reminder the church across the world isn't a collection of charities or religious groups. We're not a well-meaning collection of hymn singers or people who love to run services. We're a global movement of people who are connected by the fact that we've come to this same Jesus. We've asked him to forgive us. We've dedicated our lives to tune our hearts to his voice and live how he tells us to live. Which, if the first part is true, is just us returning home to how things should always have been. It makes holistic sense that we align our lifestyles, our decisions and our actions to choose to follow the one who is basically conducting the great song of the universe anyway. We join that song, we learn our part, we align ourselves with how things should be, not how things currently are. The poem uses this word firstborn, again, first in line. He's already described Jesus being first in line over all creation. Now he says he's first in line among all who will one day share his resurrection. Jesus is the prototype for resurrection. Because he was raised from the dead, all believers will be raised from the dead. It's through Jesus' powerful death and resurrection that God himself has reunited himself to all of humanity and all of creation. He heals the rift. He pays the debt. He brings together distant, estranged family and announces forgiveness and wholeness to all who say yes. All of the brokenness of the world, the brokenness caused by the ways that we have disaligned ourselves from this universal symphony with our discordant noise of unloving actions and attitudes. Greed, anger, hatred, selfishness, divisiveness, the thirst for power and money and position, this need that we have to take and take and take from each other and from the world's resources, and our common practice of placing value on some people who are talented or beautiful or wealthy or successful, and then totally devaluing or dehumanizing other people. All that brokenness is being addressed and healed and realigned in Jesus and through his global community of followers. The amazing paradox in all of this is that Jesus shows us how to live this way, how to live like God is our King in the way that he chose to do his whole life. Jesus was born in obscurity because living God's way is not about power or status or wealth. His family became refugees when he was still an infant because living his way is not about housing or ethnicity or our job or our language or even having a country. He He lived a life under the radar, like a normal working class guy for 30 years of his life, because living God's way wasn't about having a huge church job or a degree from Oxford or being sent out by a spiritual authority. He collects and supports and teaches male and female disciples, because living his way is not dependent on having a successful church with tens of thousands of people, or our agenda, or giving and supporting ministries. He confronts hypocrisy and spiritual abuse wherever he sees it, because living God's way is not about being popular with authorities or having a good spiritual career path. He goes to those on the edges of society and brings them dignity, worth and healing, because living God's way is not about gathering a nice group of people who are like me in a safe, holy huddle. He gives his life on the cross, and above him there's a sign that says King of the Jews, because following God's will for our lives is not about palaces or book deals or social media followers. Following him is about humility, goodness, kindness, healing. It's about perseverance through difficulty. It's about keeping our character when all around us are losing theirs. It's about finding goodness in ordinary jobs in real life. It's about working for equality and inclusion, standing up for the poor and the lost and the broken. It's about shaking the foundations of the systems that perpetuate poverty and reward greed. It's about putting ourselves in the places where we can offer our hand to those who have nothing and give generously, knowing that they will never be able to pay us back. Jesus is the image of the invisible God. He's the first in line over the whole of creation. In Jesus, everything was created, everything in heaven, everything on earth, everything that can be seen and is unseen, whether it's thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things were created through Jesus and for Jesus. He's first in everything. In him, everything is still being held together. And Jesus is the head of his people, the church. Jesus is the beginning and the first in line over everyone who will share in his resurrection, so that in everything, Jesus might have the sovereignty. God was delighted to have all of his fullness embody Jesus. And through Jesus, God reconciled to himself everything, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through Jesus' blood shed on that cross. This is the Christ, the King. This is who Christians worship.